What did I find in the Gothic films that I was watching? I found in many ways recapitulations of the great 18th century plots, of Mysteries of Udolpho, of The Monk by Matthew Gregory Lewis, and especially of Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Suddenly, this work that had been so hot in the 18th century, late 18th century, was hot at the end of the 20th century, and I wanted to know what that meant. Those were revolutionary times, so the hypothesis I started with is, we're living through a certain sort of revolution now too. That bore itself out to some degree. Because it seemed to me that one of the sources of Gothic was anxiety about all the freedom that the 60s had given rise to. Here are these young kids running around wild. What's to be done? Will they survive? Right? Do they need to be disciplined? Do they need to be hemmed in? Right? Legitimate concern on the part of something like Nightmare on Elm Street. But what I also saw was what I call dead-end Gothic. The sense that, and this is a nice quote from Harold Bloom on the subject of Edgar Allan Poe, that life is damned, doomed, and dismal, and no matter who you are, it's out there and it's going to get you. You're fated to be a victim. You're going to lose unless you are, and gets back to things like the Jason movies, unless you're absolutely perfect, you're going to be got. So there's a sense of hopelessness that pervaded those movies in their deadpan, drudging tone that I found a little bit disturbing. Just as, when a victim and a villain came onto the stage of Oprah Winfrey, and Oprah said, if you're molested when you're a child, you're going to be a molester when you grow up. If your parents are bad, they sow a bad seed, it's likely to come up with you. Then, of course, she often switches gears and gets into the Emersonian mode. Be who you want. Look at me. I started out poor. I'm marvelous now. Well, she is sort of marvelous in a way. But she plays two sides of the street, or used to. I don't think she does a whole lot of this anymore. Where is the hunger for these Gothic plots coming from? Well, when life becomes unbearably complex, when there's just too much going on around in the world, we tend to be resistant to complicating narratives, and we tend to want things boiled down in accessible, commodifiable, familiar form. So that I think it's probably peaked by now, but this whole interest in victims is actually a Gothic interest. You remember, on Oprah and all the shows, there's the woman, the man, being stalked, being chased, being called, who is really, for all purposes, a, quote, non-fictive Gothic victim, right? And who is it that torments this person? Oh, a Gothic villain, of course. Somebody that all the neighbors love. He's the nicest guy in the block. He plays with all the kids. Look, he made them a bicycle. Look, he built them a cart. But really, when he gets alone inside his home, he becomes personality number 2, and he torments the victim. Then you get them both out on the stage, and you have a little Gothic melodrama. It makes it easier to understand. It makes it exciting. It gives you a chill, and it does one other thing too, these Gothic plots. It makes you say, not me. Because those people are simple. They have the good side and the bad side. There's the Gothic hero villain. And the victim, she's just simply good, right? That's not how I am. That's not how the people around me are. These are simpler people than I am. These are simpletons. This could never happen to me, right? So there's that sense of looking in a zoo and pointing and saying, oh yeah, those are the people, that kind. And it gives a certain kind of satisfaction by virtue of distancing. It's a very complicated phenomenon, sadomasochism, and I don't pretend fully to understand it. But sadomasochism has this in common with Gothic. If you take a Gothic novel and render it down into a Boolean cube, right, into its essence, you got that hero villain who is torturing a beautiful maiden, or sometimes a young man, in a terrible place, right? There it is, in essence. And that's what sadomasochism is all about, isn't it? It's about the top, or the sadist, and the bottom, and the masochist, and a dungeon, or a fake dungeon, somewhere away from the prying and censorious eye of society. Now, it's done playfully, its adherents say, but there's obviously a serious side. Some very serious needs are being met for people to color that's far outside the lines of conventional social behavior. And it's very difficult to say exactly what the appeal of it is. I think different people, different appeal. I can hypothesize a little bit, but it won't cover all the cases, believe me.
In Wes's, I was going to say theology, interestingly, I didn't mean that, but philosophy, but I guess it is a sort of form of theology. In Wes's creation, Nightmare on Elm Street stuff, he brilliantly, I mean, it's right there in the title, right? Elm Street, what could be more prosaic? What could be more sort of Norman Rockwell, small town than Elm Street? Every town's got an Elm Street, but now Wes puts a nightmare there. And a nightmare is of the unconscious, a nightmare is of the repressed. So the very title contains two ideas which he is linking, powerfully linking. Now, sadomasochism is a very interesting problem because it has a ritualistic quality to it. It has of sexual activities, it is even more forbidden than the missionary position. So you're going one more step into the area of taboo, and it is about pushing the body to extremes. And we all have some powerful response to that because we've all felt pain in our lives. Perhaps if we were admit to it, we've all felt times when pain became a little pleasurable. We've certainly had experiences where pleasure became painful. And so this, even though, there will be a collective sort of totting and shaking of heads, oh no, never did that, I never got dressed in leather or latex on a Saturday night, and for the bulk of people that's probably true. Nevertheless, there is a sense that these images and the experiences which are at the root of these images are actually universals. And so when you get a character like Pinhead in the Hellraiser movies, like Freddy in the Nightmare pictures, who is this? They're very different characters. One's comedic, one's absolutely not comedic, probably aspires to the condition of tragedy. One is a sort of the people. Freddy is of the people. He's a sort of curiously democratic figure. After all, the bastard son of 1,000 lunatics or maniacs, he's got a lot of dads, Pinhead's rather more priestly, gothic, sort of the elite. Nevertheless, they have this curious pleasure-pain thing in common. They manifest it in different ways. Freddy has this manic energy, which is like is the energy of a testosterone-driven 15-year-old. It has that kind of viciousness, it has that kind of black humor to it, it has that kind of manic invention to it. It has that twisted sense of cool to it. That's not what's going on in my characters. They seem, to me at least, spiritually older, worn out, actually, in a curious kind of way, a little exhausted by the whole game that they've been playing for millennia. Whereas Freddy's in the moment, right? Freddy's like, what can I do now that's going to be mischievous? And Englund's performance is hugely to do with that sort of sense. And, there's this kind of anarchic quality in him, which you see in other performances by him when he hasn't got the fedora and the striped jersey on. But what Wes does extraordinarily, I think, and he doesn't just do it in the Nightmare pictures, but he's created a world in which the psychotic energy of the villain can take physical form. And that's an incredibly powerful idea, because what it liberates him as a filmmaker to do is give us images we haven't seen before. I think what Wes has done, not just in the Nightmare pictures, but actually several times, and I hope I've been able to do, is introduce something new into the visual and dramatic vocabulary of the genre we love, one of the genres we love. And nothing pleases me more, and I hope nothing pleases Wes more, than having created a character who lives beyond the limits of the very modest circumstances in which he was created. There's nothing more gratifying than finding that really this thing isn't yours anymore. It speaks to it speaks to an audience in a way that says, which the audience says, this is mine. And the danger with that is that a whole bunch of people who don't care about your movie and don't care about movies by and large, tend to care about bottom lines, then say, oh, this is a cash cow. Let's just bleed this for all that it's worth. I should say milk this to keep the analogy going, but bleed seems more appropriate. And what you end up with very often is steady dilution of what made that thing interesting in the first place.
When we first started making horror films, one of the reasons that somebody might go to see a scary movie is that there was a magic trick going on at some level. The camera was always seen as being something that recorded reality. You turned it on, you pointed at something, you couldn't lie, the camera didn't lie. And then all of a sudden, something would happen that you knew didn't happen for real. You knew it was a magic trick and you were fooled, and there was a delight. And with special effects, especially makeup special effects, dating back to Tom Savini and some of those people. Tom was working on Friday the 13th and came up with this notion of how to cut somebody's head off and make it look realistic. Well, nobody had ever seen that before. And it was shocking, and it was a kind of a fun thing. You were tricked. You were, oh my God, look at that. It looks so real. He got me. And that was a lot of fun, in the same way that you would go to see a David Copperfield thing. Today, with all of the new tools and everything that we've gotten, we don't trust the camera a bit. The camera can record whatever you can dream up, and there's a way with computers and special effects and all kinds of other tools to make that which appears on the screen anything. It's completely plastic. So we've lost the sense of we go to the movies for the magic trick. It's not there anymore. We don't get impressed by people morphing into animals or into other people, or it's just taken for granted. So when that having disappeared, there's a whole element of circus that that we used to get away with on a very low-tech level that you can't anymore. So that if you're going to try to compete in the world of circus, which is in today's world the world of Matrix or Terminator 2 or whatever, you have to compete at an enormously imaginative level, and I still think you get very little, bang for your buck or return for it. I think that ultimately the challenge is to come up with stories that affect the audience viscerally, and perhaps to show them things that they haven't seen before, which gets harder and harder, but that's the challenge of the imagination, is to use the tools that are currently available to present stories that are interesting and engaging.
Also, we're the first horror film to have a monster with a personality, if you will, and Freddy, by cracking wise as he does, it makes an audience laugh, and they drop that tension, and it makes it all that much easier to scare them again, set them up and build them up for a second scare. If you don't let an audience release its tension, they sort of get inundated with terror or horror or effects, and you kind of lose them about 2/3 of the way through. That's sexy. Gosh, I don't know what that is. The best advice I ever got about playing sexy was from an acting teacher who said, whatever you're doing when you're flirting with a girl is what you use, whatever that is. I mean, it's the true thing. I don't think of Freddy as sexy, and I don't play that, whatever that means. And it's hard to play abstracts, evil. But I do play Freddy as confident, and I do play him as vain. And maybe there's something in the vanity of Freddy. I mean, he's burned and disfigured, but he still has that bit of a swagger, and he wears the hat to cover his bald scar tissue. And he wears the hat rather jauntily. And Time magazine said I had sort of a Jimmy Cagney walk, which I thought was kind of nice. I never thought of that, but I do walk very differently. It's being able to hide under that makeup and act a little bit and put on some of the physicality. So that may be, in fact, what people mean when they say Freddy's sexy. It may be that arrogance, and it may be that swagger and that sort of evil confidence that he has that they think is sexy. Plus, look where he is. I think the adolescent identity here has to come into play, but what's Freddy invading? He's invading teenagers' most private place, their own sanctuary, their bedrooms. He's not only in their drawers. He's not only under their underwear. He's not only under their sheets. He's under their mattress. So there's an invasion there. I don't know if I can get in trouble with this word, but there's a penetration there into the subconscious that's kind of. And I think teenagers, even though they might not sound articulate sometimes when they describe what they're feeling, I know they pick up on all of this stuff. They're real bright kids. I know from my fan mail they pick up on an awful lot of the layers that we intentionally put in these movies, and I think that's probably what they're referring to. I've come up with a new answer to one of the things about these movies that I've realized that I think they are. And there was an experience I had, and I think a lot of Americans had, of my generation and younger. I mean, baby boomers, for lack of a better word. And there was a kind of a thing that used to happen around the campfire, either with your family or at summer camp. There'd be a great counselor who would tell a great ghost story around the camp. None of that singing Kumbaya or Michael Rode the Boat. I'm not talking about that junk. Now I'm talking about the counselor with a name like Forney or something like that, the guy that, who would tell a great ghost story about the claw or the hook man or the Chinese hand. And I think that the Nightmare on Elm Street movies have become a sort of surrogate grim mythology. When I say grim now, I'm talking about grim with two M's, like as in brothers. And I think that it's sort of like a kind of collective American campfire that teenagers that don't have their driver's licenses yet go do every summer or do every fall or every Halloween, and they share this kind of collective myth of this Freddy Krueger, the father, the SOB of us all, this absolute evil incarnate with this sort of sense of humor and twisted personality. And he's become the hook man of the campfire. He's become that kind of surrogate experience in a culture that's getting, so rapidly homogenized and mini-malled that there's not too much left that we can call organic or campfire anymore. We're all out shopping and getting our nails done, eating raw fish too much now.